Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Defending the Early Years 2022 Summer Institute. Again, my name is Denisha Jones, and I have the privilege of serving as the co-director. And I'm delighted to bring on one of our co-founders, Nancy Carlson Page, who's going to join me in today's session. So before we get started and introduce our guests, I just wanted to frame today. It's a little bit different than our previous days in the Institute. Our first hour is called Advocating for the Childhood All Children Deserve, a conversation with Linda Darling Hammond, who I will introduce in a second. So this is a conversation, and we're really fortunate to have some time with Linda. But just so you know, we will not have time to take questions from the audience for Linda. But of course, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. And we at Defending the Early Years will be looking through and thinking about how we might follow up and respond to some of the things that you share. And then in our second hour, we're presenting Advocacy in Action, where we highlighted some of the work of our advocacy partners that we wanted to bring to you. And then we're going to have a conversation at the end with me, Nancy, and Keisha. And we want you to stay tuned because we'll be making a special announcement at the end of the second hour. So that's our plan for today. And so let's get to it. I want to welcome Linda Darling Hammond, who is the Charles E. Duncan Professor of Education Emeritus at Stanford University and founding president of the Learning Policy Institute, created to provide high-quality research for policies that enable equitable and empowering education for each and every child. She is past president of the American Educational Research Association and author of more than 30 books and 600 other publications on educational quality and equity, including the award-winning book, The Flat World in Education: How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future. In 2006, she was named one of the nation's 10 most influential people affecting educational policy. She led the Obama Education Policy Transition Team in 2008 and the Biden Education Transition Team in 2020. She was appointed president of the California State Board of Education in 2019. And we are delighted to be in conversation with Linda today. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you. And I know we've met in different spaces and numerous times, Kappa Delta Pi conferences, ARA conferences. I used the Flat World in my Foundation of Education classes before, and it was great to read. And it's been great to see all the work you're doing and all the things that you've been doing for education. And the thing about policy, and it's, policy is a big part of what we want to be doing here at Defending the Early Years, thinking about our advocacy efforts, our policy work. How can we support early childhood teachers and families and young children and educators and researchers to really think about their role in advocacy work and in policy work as well, too. So I'll begin with our first question. One of the most basic inequities in early childhood education in our country is access to quality early childhood education and care, and that's due to cost. Families with the means can send their children to quality pre-K programs that many lower income families can't afford. Do you have thoughts as to how we could eliminate this basic inequity?
Well, there are a number of states that have been moving to create universal preschool. And have made some headway on that, both by creating programs that are connected to the public school system and also using different strategies, vouchers or contracting strategies to include private providers of early childhood education in ways that have either sliding scale fees or that underwrite completely subsidize the fees. But we've got a lot of distance to go on that. Right now I'm in California. I saw some folks popping up in their chat about California who are with me here. We're just starting universal transitional kindergarten, which was a vehicle that we had for the youngest fives. And now it will be available, or who are still 4 when school, would have otherwise they would have been able to enroll in kindergarten. So it'll be for all 4-year-olds. We're also investing more money into 3-year-olds and childcare at the same time. So we need to advocate for states to do that kind of work. But at the same time, you've got to advocate for the education that's provided to be developmentally appropriate, for educators to have access to a knowledge base about child development and about how to support young people. We need to then fund that also. So we've got a lot of money going into subsidies for providers who want to, engage with the new credential that's going to come out in early childhood. But for the quality of care to be high quality, we need to both invest in the programs and invest in the people who are going to be the educators in those programs. New Jersey has done that in the Abbott districts, and I know they're bringing it statewide. I know there's somebody at least here from New Jersey. I saw that pop up. North Carolina is another place, Washington State, California. It's very important to be organized and to be thoughtful in the advocacy for both the provision of services and, of course, to be able to make the case. There's a lot of research on the efficacy of early childhood and how it actually saves money in the long run when kids don't need special education, don't end up being retained in grade, don't end up with a variety of other costly needs that could occur later without that early childhood education. So that's part of the advocacy need, is to be armed with those data.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The data is very important. And we're seeing a lot of people in the chat mention how underfunded universal pre-K is and the challenges providers face. I know providers here in New York that they don't want to raise the price to parents, but that, food is up, gas is up, all of their expenses are up. How are they going to give quality care if at the end of the day they're in debt, right? Because they don't want to raise their prices. And so that's a huge issue I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I think, what I didn't mention, and I should have, is that, when President Biden came into office, he talked a lot about and put in his Build Back Better plan a very massive potential federal investment in early childhood education that would then match those state dollars that would then allow all, the rising tide to raise all boats. And that was not yet passed by the Senate. And so there's a big federal advocacy agenda that's also important, and probably a big agenda around who you vote for in the November elections, because we should be holding people to account for their intentions around providing in the United States what every other industrialized country already has, which is free, accessible, high quality preschool.
I think that's a good point, because it's got to be both federal and state. We can't leave it just to the state dollars to do it, and we need the federal government to come in, and yeah, we need that bill to get passed and other things as well too. So thank you for that.
In my state of Massachusetts, recently I read that early childhood education is actually extremely costly here, and it's about $20,000 per child per year. But that's really because of the teacher-child ratio that isn't the same when you get into higher grades in school. So, it costs money to have quality early childhood education. That's sort of out of the gate a fact. And yeah.
A lot of families feel like they're paying as much, and they feel this way because it's true. They're paying as much for preschool as they will pay for college for their children. But you need those ratios. You need the support and the training for the teachers. I mean, that's just critically important. And we undervalue in this country the degree to which making those investments early, pays off in so many ways, through down the road. And that's, I think, part of what was a strong element of advocacy, at a moment in time.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to rekindle that knowledge base and that advocacy now.
In my own state, the vast majority of children have all adults in the home working, young children outside of the home. And so it's, you could say, a crisis in the sense that, people really aren't able to afford the care, and yet they're going to work, and somebody's got to be caring for the kids. And as you say, the results of good quality education are very positive, but if a child doesn't have it, then the converse is true. And
as you all know, the demands in K through 12 for academic, knowledge and progress have been, intensifying over the last 20 years. And so kids who come into kindergarten who have had no early learning are really facing a very rapid climb in their, knowledge base. And they are not only going to, suffer from the lack of that experience base that they've had, but it can stay with them throughout many, many years of school. And that, is very, because of the fact that kindergarten is now treated almost as first grade used to be treated, and so on, which is not something I endorse. We really do have to help people understand the importance, the policymakers understand the importance of giving kids that early opportunity. And of course, we also know from brain science and all of the neuroscience that's coming on, how much is going on in those little minds. When kids are 2 years old and 3 years old. 3 years old is really the point at which a lot of the language, neural network is being formed. They say the neurons that fire together wire together, and it's experiences that makes the difference for what kids learn in those years. It's not that the learning is done, or that you can't do it later, but it is a really, really important time to give kids a rich, stimulating environment.
Yeah, and that's definitely coming up in the comments, people talking about developmentally appropriate practices not existing right now, right? Because of the push down of reading and math, and just thinking about that's where a lot of the money's going, right? The money comes in, but it's not going to the providers, to the teachers for the materials. It's going to the curriculums, the scripted curriculums, the consultants. So how do we, we need to think about that too. How can we earmark the money for the things that we know are going to boost child development, and not the things that are just so focused on the math and the reading, right?
We're going to talk more about all of that soon, but I'll go to I'd love to just, I'll roll on that actually, but I have a question that I want to ask you about, Learning Policy Institute, where you're the founding president, and they put out so much amazing amount of reports and information. They developed recently, and I think you were key in that, the Whole Child Policy Toolkit. And it's a really rich, amazing resource. We've got a link to it, I think, in the chat, right, Denisha? Yeah, so that hopefully the participants can read it, because it's a terrific resource and full of a lot of information. One of the key points in there is that, millions of children in the United States experience trauma really every year, from homelessness, from food insecurity, violence, abuse, and other traumatic experiences. So one question is, what can people do in early childhood settings to help to mitigate the effects of trauma in the early years?
Well, it's really important to understand how trauma expresses itself, right? Yeah. Because it can be the way in which trauma shows up in our bodies and in our brains is that it causes adrenaline and cortisol rush. It can create the fight or flight syndrome. It can make you very much on edge. It can cause difficulty in paying attention, as well as being sort of at a flashpoint where you might, if somebody steals your toy, or not steals your toy, borrows and takes your toy, or if something happens, kids might flash in ways that are, unexpected. And if you see that as misbehavior, then often the immediate action is expulsion, suspension, pushing kids out. In fact, the rates of exclusion in preschools are very, very high. Yeah. And it's often because people aren't prepared or trained with a knowledge base about how to de-escalate, how to calm a child, how to then engage in a conversation about what's going on. And of course, very young children may not have the language for it. So you may have to do other kinds of detective work, as you do sometimes in older grades as well, to figure out how to talk to the family, how to figure out what may be going on with the child. But at the point where kids can communicate, and sometimes it's through pictures and sometimes it's through words and so on, trying then to help the child both become calm, know that they're cared for. Relationships are the most effective antidote to trauma. And so having those strong relationships, having that caring, but also having the tools and the skills to de-escalate, to support children in communicating, and then to get the resources for them, and to create a healing environment in which a lot of that trauma can be healed. And I think it's important for people to realize that 46% of children in this country experience some kind of traumatic event or set of events every year. And so over the course of, a lifetime or a childhood, almost everyone will experience something. And it can be anything from divorce or death of a parent to the experience of homelessness, the experience of eviction, the experience of food insecurity, all kinds of things can be going on with children. So all of our schools, I'm at another conference right now, and we just talked about the need in K-12 education also to create loving schools that are really rooted in those relationships. And that means sometimes we have to design them in ways that allow for that. In early childhood, I think that's also true that you were talking about the curricula and the press for reading and math and that getting pushed down. That creates more stress sometimes because some kids will be ready to take up certain kinds of, skills, more formal skills in reading or math at an early age. All kids are ready to engage in literacy activities and in singing and talking and hearing books and in counting and all of that. But once it becomes formalized and people start putting, X's on the paper, and, I know there are places where even in the preschool years, kids are sitting with worksheets and, being forced to do things that they may not be biologically, developmentally ready to do or cognitively ready to do, and then having an experience in some cases of failure, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because there's, I can't do this, rather than, the kind of developmentally appropriate strategy where kids are introduced to things when they are ready for them. And there, of course, is the need for the teacher then to be very much in tune with kids' development, with where they are, with what they're ready to do, and then to be doing all of this work in an environment that is especially organized around inquiry and play. The value of play is something that has to be, always articulated and explained to folks who think it's just unstructured, running around, as opposed to an environment that is set up to enable kids to explore, to experience, and then to be guided in a learning path that is developmentally supportive for them. And that, I think, it's back to this question of trauma. Some kids will bring trauma in from outside of the school, but school can create trauma for children if it is designed in ways that are not developmentally appropriate. Years ago, my own quest for developmentally appropriate early childhood education for my kids led to developing co-founding a preschool in Silver Spring, Maryland. I know there's somebody in the room from Silver Spring that's still there, the Children's Community School, but it was really designed to support a developmentally appropriate environment for students in those early years when it was very hard to find, and still is in some communities.
You're making me remember also, I'm glad you mentioned play, the importance of symbolic play, because children will use their play in a symbolic way often to work out trauma that they've experienced. And it takes some amount of, knowledge and experience on the part of a teacher to recognize that symbolic play is going on and that it's got a healing function. We need sort of have some tools for interpreting that kind of play. I'm remembering when I was in El Salvador, when the war was being fought, the shooting war, and I was in the place where it was happening. And I wanted to interview the young children in the community about war, which they were experiencing directly. And I learned really quickly, it wasn't the fault of my bad Spanish, that I couldn't ask them direct questions. It was too difficult, but I was there with other educators, and we brought the wonderful book Swimming with us. Do you know that book?
I don't.
Okay, it's a bunch, ultimately it's a story, fiction story of a lot of little fish who are scared by a large tuna, and they gather together to make the shape of the big fish to survive and get past the threat.
Right.
And what was interesting was when we read that book, every single child I read it to in El Salvador interpreted it in terms of the war they were experiencing.
Sure.
And talked about the war through that book, through that story. and yet couldn't do it directly. It was very eye-opening to me that when we give symbols to kids that are open-ended, Play-Doh or building blocks, construction, art materials, they can use those things because they know within actually what they need to do in play.
Yeah. And, you know, a skillful teacher will observe the play. Yes. And will begin to think about what is being enacted here, what might be behind this. Sometimes that's the occasion for that conversation with the child or with the family about what, you know, may be going on as a symbol. But your comment about the book is also so important, because the way we choose and use books and stories in early childhood is so important, and can be very important around trauma. There's so many wonderful children's books that allow kids to, you know, process various, you know, things that they may be experiencing. And so that's another whole part of developmentally appropriate education is, you know, having the right kinds of books and stories in the classroom in which kids can see themselves, they can see their experiences, and they can, you know, process and learn how to deal with those experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, one thing you mentioned, it made me think about as we get into the next question and just talking about play, but this idea that, you know, school is not a joyful place for a lot of children. And I feel like we forget that, you know, early childhood is the space to make students like to take their natural curiosity and build upon it. Like children come in with all these questions and they want to know things, and we kind of take that all away from them in an effort to learn things that they're not ready to learn, right? Like, you know, if, you know, some people who believe when a child's ready to write, they will write, they will need to write, they will need to write something, and they'll come to you and say, help me write this, right? And that's the point, but there's a lot of other things they can be doing to getting ready for the writing, right? Yep. Like scooping dirt and shovels is actually building, you know, the motor skills you're going to need to write with a pen one day. And like all of these other activities are super important, fine motor, gross motor, all of them. And so how do we, you know, it's just, I know we don't have the answers, but how to remind people how important that is. Someone mentioned in the comments too, and I remember thinking this when I was at Howard University and we had a leadership department, and I said, you know, there's no child development class requirement for your principals. Aren't they going to be principals of little kids? And they kind of looked at me like, I was like, can I get just a 6-hour workshop on a Saturday? Can I just get a little time with those principals to just remind them that you're going to have 5-year-olds, and how you are an administrator for 5-year-olds is different than how you're an administrator for 16-year-olds. And you need to know a little bit, but I haven't seen any administrative program think about child development theory for people working in that K through 12 space, right? And
well, we're working on that right now in California, because we know we have a lot of principals who are about to have TKs in their building, transitional kindergartens.
Yes.
And we're helping, you know, we've got a leadership academy that's building a program. But, you know, child development doesn't stop at the age of 6, right? No. It goes all the way. And I used to teach high school and taught a course in adolescent development. And we need people to understand development, you know, all the way through. I think it's one of the biggest problems we have in schools is when people do not understand human development along all the dimensions, which are intertwined, social and emotional and academic and cognitive and moral. So I'm totally with you on that. And I think it's a huge place for investment. I saw a comment fly by about the importance of joy in learning, and there is a lot of neuroscience on that now too. You know, the social and emotional are completely connected to the cognitive. If you're in a positive space, if it's joyful, if you are engaged, if it's exciting, if you feel seen, if you feel a sense of trust with your other students and the teacher, if you're not being stigmatized or traumatized or bullied or whatever else might be going on, you learn much more effectively. And, you know, creating that environment takes a lot of explicit work. It's what a lot of wonderful preschool teachers do, is help kids learn how to be in relationship with each other and how to be supported in themselves. And so it's just critically important that we create the space and then the supports for that to go on.
Yeah. And it's also about trusting in children and their natural development. Right? A lot of this stuff will go about if we just support it and trust it and not think, there's people believe, oh, they're not learning unless you're talking to them and they're listening. But that's like one type of learning, right? We
Learning,
can go on.
yes.
Yeah.
Teaching
But
is not talking and learning is
no.
not listening.
No, exactly. And if we trust that children will bring all of this excitement to the process, right? And we need to capitalize on that. But let's talk about this system. And this came up here in the comments, and I'm starting to move to like a really maybe a far left space on this. So I need you to pull me back and say, no, we can fix the system we have, or maybe we need to move forward. But in the report, the Whole Child Policy Toolkit, which we shared, you also recognize that ECC systems are very fragmented, right? They're made up of a patchwork of programs that often end up impeding our efforts to meet the needs of young children. And now we see a lot of public schools, right, taking on the role of pre-K3, pre-K4. DC has them. I think that's what's happening in California with your transition kindergarten, right? And we're seeing more of early childhood get usurped almost into the public school systems with good and bad outcomes for that. So can you offer suggestions on how we might envision and implement a more coherent approach to early childhood education in the US? Someone mentioned in the comments, we need to separate out K through 2. I'm almost to the point where I'm like, give us everyone up till 10, and let's take them out of the public schools and let's give them a whole child something else. And I don't even want to, say 11-year-olds are on your own, but I feel like if you give us at least to their 10, we can do a lot of good with the 10-year. Those 10 years are so important before we turn them over to what schooling has become.
So it's so interesting what you're saying. And again, this is the topic of the conference that I'm in here in California. We have inherited a school system that is fundamentally based on false assumptions. The assumption that your intelligence is predetermined and it's baked and done and it's genetically inherited, and then you should be identified early on and labeled and sorted as to what kind of education you get based on these assumptions about intelligence. That the approach to schools should be one of standardized instruction. The factory model was the model that was for industry at the time that our schools were invented in the 1910s and 20s. So Henry Ford's assembly line was the design for schools. So you put kids on the assembly line in kindergarten, and they get a different teacher every year, and then they get in middle school and high school, they get another teacher every 15 minutes, and they go through this, and you put them on different conveyor belts depending on where they are in the tracking system. And the goal of schools is to select and to sort and to put people on a bell curve, which was invented in the 1920s by some professors at Stanford, I'm sorry to say, Truman and Cubberley and others, who were eugenicists, who had a very clear idea that you should create tests that would align people so that you could rank and sort them against each other. And they knew who should be at the bottom based on their eugenicist beliefs and who should be at the top, and they designed the tests to allow for that. And so when you say we've got to take the kids, we got to, have them for X number of years and then send them. I mean, basically you're saying send them to a terrible system, which will be punitive, which will be traumatic, which will be stressful, which it often is, right? And, and I'm glad to see Margaret say we have a wonderful public school, because there are wonderful public schools. Mm-hmm. And that's because wonderful educators are always pushing against the, sort of policy influences that are trying to keep the selecting and sorting function front and center for schools. And we see it in the testing systems and the accountability systems and so on. So my point of all that is to say, we need to be making the whole system, a system that is about child development. It's about enabling people to find their joy and their potential and getting the skills and the tools to actualize on that. Yes, we should be insisting that as we bring early childhood online as a publicly funded enterprise so that it is accessible, that it also is rooted in that conception of development and learning and is not turned into another version of the select and sort machine, which was, the basis of our system, which, as I say, a lot of people have been working to push the edges of that system. We do have some wonderful and great public schools. We do have schools that are organized around children in the right ways, and we need a lot more of them, and then we need early childhood to push upward into that system rather than the reverse. In California, we have something called Pre-K Foundations, which is a curriculum framework for our early childhood preschools. We're going to grow that up through third grade rather than trying to take the existing elementary curriculum and push it down in an effort to do that, to keep that developmental perspective and to grow that developmental perspective throughout the grades.
And did you say statewide you're doing that, or where?
Statewide in California, yeah.
You know, we do the same thing in the Boston Public Schools. It has a really good early childhood model that's trying to meet developmental needs of children pre-K through third grade, and not, you know, absorb them into the model of education that that you just described, a factory model. That segues into our next
so
question.
Nancy, I want to be sure that you send me some information about the Boston initiative so that we can learn from you.
Absolutely, because it's pretty exciting. And you know what? They have, they've actually got a whole early childhood department, which is a pretty great thing. And they also have a whole system of coaches. And it works awfully well because they have professional development. Then they have a lot of paid coaches who are in those classrooms with teachers, helping them to implement things they've learned in professional development, because a lot of the approaches they're using are new. The teachers didn't have it in teacher education, and they have been operating in a more traditional model, and they need a lot of support. But having those coaches present all the time is a hugely important dimension of, I think, having an effective and successful early childhood program.
Totally agree. And we, in fact, are trying to build that coaching model out here on the left coast. So we do need to talk about how you can help us.
That's exciting. So, you know, I think you and I communicated at the time, around the time we were starting Defending the Early Years. And, you know, we started in response really to what was happening with education reform and the fact that academic skills were getting pushed down to earlier grades, to kindergarten, and even preschool. And we were so alarmed by that, we really were trying to take action of how to reverse that trend. But it was at Defending the Early Years, our cornerstone, you know, vision and commitment is really to active learning, constructivist learning, play-based education for the early years. And it is a big mountain to climb to try to help policymakers and the public in general understand what is quality early childhood education. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's happening in the context you described, the history of education and the assumptions about learning that sort of dominate society. So what can we do you think, to help policy makers and the public understand what does high quality early childhood education really look like, and how play is a vital component of that? Because play is so often considered frivolous, a waste of time, something they don't even, what are those kids doing anyway? Nothing, they're just running around, you know, without really a analytical understanding of all the wide-ranging purposes of children's play. So we struggle with this. This is probably our biggest struggle, is to try to get a voice around what does quality, real quality, look like in early childhood.
Yeah, you know, I don't know that there's a single answer, but I do think that there is a part of the answer that's a research related piece, which is, you know, back in, this has been a long time battle across, you know, not just in the United States, around the world. Back in the 70s, I guess it was, or 80s, in Germany, there was a big move. You know, the kindergarten was invented in Germany, as the word suggests. And there was a move to academic kindergartens. And they did a gigantic study, which I talk about in something I wrote years ago. They looked at 50 schools that continued to play kindergarten and 50 schools that went to academic kindergarten, followed the kids until they were 9 years old, and there were hundreds of kids across these 100 schools, and looked at how they were doing at that point when they were about 9 years old. And the kids who'd been in play kindergarten outperformed the kids in the academic kindergartens on every dimension.
Yeah.
You know, reading and math and what they measure in Germany, which is called industry and responsibility, and on every dimension, because they had the opportunity to learn, in the way that was needed and appropriate for them at that time. And that was then actually used as a way to push back the academic kindergarten movement at that time. But there is research that should be, assembled. I don't know that it has been, and synthesized in a way that helps people see not only what high quality preschool looks like in a concrete way, but then what the outcomes of that are. I think that there's an anxiety, and the United States is always trying to rush things, where that's a cultural thing. You sit in the playground with your kids and parents are talking about, did your child do this yet? Did your child do that yet? Et cetera, et cetera. There's all this anxiety that mothers carry around, but it doesn't have anything to do with, whether you read when you are 7 or whether you read when you're 4, whether you're potty trained at 2 or at 3. It does not have anything to do with how well you read or use the bathroom later in life. And trying to help people understand that this is not a race. It is a process, in which lots of things are going on, and all of those things are necessary and important. But I do think we have to assemble the research on it, and we have to make that much more visible across the country.
Did you have thoughts about how, because, some of those studies, the German one included, they are quoted by people I know in our field, but somehow it doesn't get outside of where we are.
Yeah, somebody needs to pull together sort of a seminal synthesis that then everybody can use, that pulls all the research together in a place. And then, you can arm folks with it. And it should both, just as you said, Nancy, describe what high quality preschool looks like, what's going on in there. And it should explain play, because people think of play as, it happens outside, in the backyard, where the kids go out and they do whatever they do. They're running around or doing whatever. That's not what you mean by, not that that isn't also appropriate, but in structured preschool environments, the play stations are set up with great care. The play materials are there for real reasons.
Yep.
The observation that the teacher is making of the children when they're engaged in these activities is meaningful and translates into other decisions that the teacher is making about what that child is doing and learning and needs to do next, or could be given the opportunity to try. So that I think we almost need to break down what the word play means in this setting. It's a kind of intentional inquiry and an intentional experimentation that kids are engaged in, as well as, just physical opportunities to develop their, to move and develop their skills and so on. But anyway, I think we need to explain it. I think that people have assumptions, and there's anxiety in many communities, which I understand, that my kid won't be able to do this. So if I start them earlier, I make them sit down and copy off the board or whatever, that they will get better at it, and not understanding, what the developmental implications of that are, and then what the outcomes can be. So,
yeah, we see that so much. The research is there, but people aren't using it, and the comments are blowing up about that. But I think the other thing, I stopped mentioning a lot about.
It's not an easily attainable place necessarily. It's,
yeah,
it's there, but it's kind of here and it's there, and if you read the journals and if you know,
yeah.
but if you're trying to go talk to a legislator or you're trying to go get a
Mhm.
preschool started in your local community or something, you need something that is like, you know, a 20 or 30 page, monograph or something that says, here's why, here's what, here's why, and here's how it will.
Yeah, definitely you have to simplify it for them. But
Yeah.
there's also this feeling like, and you talk about this, and I remember this from the flat world, right? Like the research in other countries, they tend to not have our problems around racial and class distinctions. Well, not class, everybody has those issues, but racial issues, which make it difficult, right, to enact a policy that is good for all children. When people are talking about the comments, some people believe, well, no, low income kids need this experience and these kids, right? And so it hinders sometimes, I think, our history of our country hinders our ability to implement that research because, we have this fragmented system and so we can't control what one state is doing, what another state is doing. But there's also a lot of pushback on who gets access to these types of experiences and who doesn't as well.
Yeah. And I'm watching the chat. I really appreciate your comment, Denisha, because, when you've had a lot of denial of educational opportunity, then you've got the anxiety that is associated with, can I get that opportunity? And what is that opportunity? How do I make sure that my child gets it? And it's hard to trust that, development will unfold when you're not clear that you will get the opportunity. And I will also say there are a lot of schools in which, they're not well set up for the explicit teaching of the literacy continuum that is needed, which, reinforces that concern. I'm seeing a lot in the chat about, this book and that book that, have good summaries of some of the research, which is great. But what I'm trying to express, and I'm saying this as, I started the Learning Policy Institute so that we could get knowledge about learning into policy. And and I came out of academia having spent, a decade at Columbia and a couple of decades at Stanford. And the books are great, but somebody's got to take the books and bring it into a much more concise, accessible form if it's going to get widely used, if you're going to be able to carry it to the places that you want to be able to carry it.
I do. I have seen, I think I'm a little jaded, but I have seen people try to do what you're talking about, but I want to acknowledge it's occurring in a context that you nodded to in the beginning, which is, it is a political context where there are certain assumptions about education and learning that are held onto by conservative thinking people and it becomes progressive education at some level becomes a threat to that. And, it does unfortunately fall into, people pull on research even to back up all kinds of teacher-directed learning and skills, and people say, oh, the kids are doing much better in tests because we drilled them and so they got the answers better. And I've had debates myself trying to draw on the research, the play-based research, and sometimes they don't go anywhere. It's a tough fight.
I agree. I think we need to give it to, we need to give it to the people who need it. So that sometimes that's all they need is to go out and do it, right? Some people's minds we're not going to change, but there are some people who would do it if they, had anything that said, well, this is how you support it. So I definitely think we have to start with those people who are on the fence, who are closer to this side than the others who are deeply entrenched on the other, and really get the parents involved too, because I think they have a lot of
parents. Being able to explain to parents is very, very important. And somebody put in the chat, why not use the NAEYC position statement, which I think is wonderful and terrific. It doesn't actually present enough of the research to be persuasive to those who don't already know the research, I think. And so that's part of the challenge, is you want people to understand that there's an evidence base that you can then, point them to and give them the clear ideas about what the outcomes are. But we need that combination of, here's what you're doing, here's why you do it, and here's what we found. And I think that with parents, they're going to bring the anxieties that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And I saw, when my one of my kids was younger, we changed schools in the middle of maybe it was first grade. I can't remember exactly what grade it was. It was right near the beginning. But I saw two back to school nights. One was the teacher saying, we've got this new literacy program, and where the kids are going to be writing, and they're going to be able to invent their own spelling. And it was, don't worry, I have to do this. It was kind of like, I have to do this, and she couldn't explain why or what the outcome would be. And the parents ate her alive. It was like, like sharks, seeing blood in the water. The next time I saw a similar chat from another teacher, because we had changed schools, and she was doing the same thing. It must have been the year for that kind of curriculum shift happening in the schools. And she had her articles there on the table. One was from the Harvard Ed Review, another was from another place. She said, here's how writing unfolds. Here's how this literacy practice unfolds. Here's what will happen. Here's why. Don't worry about it. You can see from the research that the kids will master, the traditional spellings at a point in time. And here's how I'm going to help them do that over time, et cetera, et cetera. And the parents, you could see them getting like, and then they sat back and said, oh, okay. We need every teacher to be able to do that kind of rooted explanation, and every advocate who's going to talk to a policymaker to be able to say, look, you might be worried about X, but here's how it's going to work. Here's why it works that way. Here's the research that will reassure you that this is going to work out fine in the end and better for the kids. And so it's that kind of an advocacy frame that we need, both with parents and community members, but also then with policymakers.
Now that's a really helpful story. That's really.
And can we take it as an invitation, Linda, for DEY to work with the Learning Policy Institute to maybe produce some of those materials? Because I think we can do it. I think we can get it done, and we can put together these small, quick, this is what the research says, this is how you do it, this is why you do it, and let us know how it works out.
Now do it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Those 45 minutes flew by super quickly, but we are so delighted to have you here. We're going to continue to support the work of the Learning Policy Institute, and look for more ways that we can partner. But I think everyone's agreed that this was a great conversation. We're not done yet, but Linda is at another conference and does have to take off. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Great to see you both. It was really a pleasure. And I look forward to working together.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be reaching out for sure.
Me too.
So don't go anywhere. We're not done. We're going to continue this conversation thinking about advocacy and policy. But first, Nancy and I want to talk a little bit more about this conversation we were just having with Linda.
I'm glad now we can just continue this, Denisha, because you and I have talked about it a few times. But, we've known for a long time that affluent families have much more opportunity for their children to engage and play in their early childhood settings that they often pay a lot of money for. And low-income families end up in the public programs that I've certainly seen, and I'm sure many people participating have seen, where kids are getting more of a passive learning approach, a top-down teacher-directed skills-based approach that's totally out of step with who they are and what they need. And I've thought about this for a long time. I started calling it the play disparity or the play gap, because it's so kind of class-based. But after yesterday's panel, which I don't know if everyone who's joining us today saw, I hope you watch it if you didn't, because it was amazing. But it got me rethinking about this idea of the play disparity and how it's playing out in the early years very profoundly, to provide a whole set of skills and achievements to a certain class of kids, and robbing other kids from these things. And I realized in a different way that it's race-based, that it's racial justice-based. And I wanted to ask you for your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I've been studying play. I've been a play advocate for a long time, and I've been studying play more intently this year. And my thinking about play as pedagogy and my work in teacher education, and how do we, if we want teachers to lead with play and to allow play to be used in the classroom, how do we prepare them for that? Because, I've been teaching courses on play as you have, but it was kind of like, play is important, make time for play, this is why. But after visiting Anji, China, and seeing fully play immersed, real, true, authentic play programs as the way, as the pedagogy, as the curriculum, wanted to China shift that thinking, right? And so been writing about it and reading and thinking about play. And, Linda was trying to define it earlier. And, I always say play, I just say it's on a spectrum from completely open-ended, children are doing whatever they want in the space they have and the time and the materials, and that is still purposeful, till it goes down, right? Where maybe they're doing certain activities with certain materials, but it's still their choice, but the materials and the environment has been more structured, to where it's not really a choice. They have to do this activity and it might be fun, right? To it's all teacher led and they don't have any say, right? That spectrum, right? So when I think about access to play, I also see it on a spectrum, right? So you have on the far end people who say play is not beneficial, and so they don't believe in access to play for anyone, right? Or they might say play is something children do on their own. It doesn't have any connections to learning, right? And then there are people who are like, play is how children learn, or pay the reward from learning. So people think, you learn for an hour and a half, I'll reward you with some play, right? We give them recess, we give them indoor. It's a reward for doing what we ask you to do in the classroom. To more teachers saying it, play is how children learn. No matter whether they're running around outside screaming their heads off or they're playing an activity over here, they're learning, right? They're developing, they're doing that. And then other to the far end where I'm more at, that play is a right, right? It's a human right of all children to engage in majority of their hours spent in play. So thinking about that spectrum and then thinking about who has access to that, right? And I think some people think some children, right, are entitled to that kind of access to free play because they come from the right families, right? Well, their parents haven't make enough money and they read enough books and they give them enough experiences at museums, and they have that higher social capital, tend to be white, tend to be well educated. So their children are entitled to play space, where we hear a lot of educators saying Black and brown and poor children aren't entitled to that, right? A few people mentioned in the comments the book Segregation by Experience, right, which is looking at agency and racism in the early years. And what they found was that hidden beneath belief teachers' attitudes about children was this belief that you had to earn your right to agency. Things like being able to get up and walk around in the classroom, being able to ask a question, being able to support a friend, right? Those behaviors, when they saw children doing them, they said, well, our children haven't earned them. So you don't believe children have a right to that, right? And play is really about agency. A lot of those behaviors, right, happen through play. Children take on the feel of agency and they do these amazing things. And so the research is really powerful, and I'll share a link to it during the second half, is because it shows that, there are all these biased beliefs that lead to that impact someone's access to play. If you think a child can't play until they can read, or can't play until they can do a certain amount of math problems in a certain amount of time, then you're limiting their access. You have a deficit view of who that child is, right? So we see that a lot. Not everyone, but some people, or teachers get bombarded. They're under a lot of stress to meet ridiculous benchmarks that really aren't necessary. So they might pull back on the play. Where for me, when I was teaching kindergarten, and again, we weren't full on in the accountability movement we are now, but I couldn't wait. Sometimes I'd be like, let's just go play a little early, right? Because the more time I knew things were better, the more time they had to play. But I also had that flexibility, as opposed to teachers today where, someone mentioned in the comments, the administrator said, we can't monitor teachers while children are playing, right? So there's this feel that you can't control the play, you can't control what's happening, so that it's not. And someone else mentioned not having a lot of support from administrators, right? If administrators aren't supporting play, then that's very, problematic. So there's a lot of reasons. And then back to that parent anxiety, right? And for a lot of parents, especially for Black parents who came through like the 70s and 80s and segregation, right? Play and progressive education felt like an abandonment of their children because we weren't giving them the education they needed to succeed. It was like, right, it was just seen as, oh, you're just doing this to them. You're not giving them what Lisa Delpit calls the culture of power, right? You're not teaching them the things that they need. I've seen some of that change over time. I'm seeing more Black parents and parents of color who are more into like this idea of like a liberated childhood and a decolonized parenting, who are seeing the value of play and seeing how play builds confidence. And in a world where you are struggling, so there's racial trauma, right? We were talking about trauma and toxic stress. Let's not forget that racism is racial trauma, is toxic stress, right?
Yeah.
And they're seeing that when children have time to play, it's helping them develop the resiliency and the skills to live in that world, right? So we need to promote more of that. We need to promote more parents who are recognizing that play is important for all children, right? Not just a privilege for white wealthy children, which we've seen in a lot of places. And you know, I think part of it again is trusting children, right? Like children they're gonna play. I've seen kids play in places where play is not meant to happen. Refugee camps in Tijuana, when we had all of the migrants coming up and kids finding dirt and playing. I've seen a kid at a bus stop play with a glass bottle because he was being, you know, he wasn't getting attention from the adults around him. So he started playing with a glass bottle until someone took it away, right? Kids will do this because that's in their nature, right? That's just how they are. And so getting teachers and parents to really support that and recognize that this is your child is eager to do things, to move their body, to touch, to explore. That's all good stuff. That's how we build good, happy learners and strong readers and thinkers, right? And so, but we have to reassure parents because the world is bent on giving them so much worry, giving them so much fear. You know, not every kid is going to go to an Ivy League college, and that's okay. Your kid will do just fine at the local state college down the way, learning what they really want to learn and pursuing their passions, and just really getting parents, because they used to trust themselves and they used to trust their children a lot more. But we had so many messages coming in that's bombarding them. And I think it's really challenging. So I think it's going to take a lot, you know, but there are definitely gaps. There is a play gap. There's a gap in accessibility. There's a gap in where play is offered. One of the programs I was working with in Pittsburgh, they specifically wanted to be in public schools, and I got to go to predominantly Black public school and see Black kids playing in school, and that's so rare. And all the funders keep saying, why don't you do this outside of school and after school? Because then it's not accessible. If it's not in the place that kids are legally required to be all day, then all kids are not going to get it. If it's before and after school, then it's only the kids who are in before and after school, right? So we have to really think about those issues. It's easier to get funding to put this in something in the hands of the few who can have it. But if you're committed, right, to making it access for everyone, then you have to stay grounded in that. And I'm happy, and I'll share a link to the Hatch Partners in Play program as well, too, because they're doing amazing work and they're showing what it really looks like. So that was a lot.
No, I thank you. I appreciate your thoughts and all the conversations you and I have had on this subject. And I'm thinking there probably are things we can say to parents that are research-based about the value of play. I mean, just thinking about brain development, you know, it's like a little more than a quarter of the brain is developed in a newborn. And by the age of 5, 90% of the brain is developed, and it develops as a result of engagement, experience, and activity, play. That's how brains are growing in little kids. So we have to, part of our advocacy probably does, I appreciated Linda's points about research, because I think it's true. We've got to get more strategic, I think, about how we use it and with whom.
Yeah. And there are people in the chat and the comments. I'm loving this. I thought long and hard on an acronym for play, and the best I could come up with was personalized learning for all youth. And then Chris Eastman hit us with purposeful learning for active youngsters, which I love. And how did I not come up with that? And then Jean put purposeful learning for agency of youngsters, right? So let's think about all of these different ways that we can think of what play is. But remember, there was that big push for personalized learning, and that's when we were like, yeah, play is personalized learning, right? And when you think about what really gets me, so we think about all these structured social and emotional curriculums where teachers have to set aside 30 minutes to teach you about curiosity. If you let children play, they will understand what curiosity is, right? That's what it is. So we create these packaged curriculums that are money makers. Let's not pretend there's not as much money to be made off of open-ended unstructured play as there is on other things, right? But we put all the money there, and so it goes away from the play. We can keep going, and I apologize. I know some people wish this was more of a dialogue, but this is today, we're doing advocacy in action. So we are going to move on to our second hour part. We're going to come back tomorrow with aligning research into practice, and there will be time for Q&A, and we'll talk about some of the research, actually some of the current research. Linda was talking about previous research, but there is current research about academics, the impact of academic instruction in early childhood. And we're going to talk about that and other research as well and how that's aligning to people's practice. But right now we want to transition to our second hour, which is called our Advocacy in Action segment. So we'll have Nancy back for a special announcement at the end. But just to give you an idea, so we were thinking about how do we show people what does advocacy look like in early child education? Because a lot of teachers I've worked with don't feel like advocates. They don't know how to advocate. They don't, there's a lot that they don't know. And so there's so much good advocacy going on. So I believe it was Keisha's idea. Keisha Reed is our podcast host, and she suggested we put together a video for you guys, and that's what we did. So we interviewed some folks who are doing advocacy work, and we shared highlights from some advocacy work. And so all of this can be found on our website in either our podcast or our DEY mini grants, which we'll talk more about at the end. We offer mini grants and we get reports, and they can be used for advocacy efforts. And also on our Advocacy Map, which we created a couple years ago, where we're highlighting this amazing work. So please join us. We're going to watch the video. Oh, also, you might want to turn on the closed caption. You should see a sign on the bottom for CC, or for me, I have 3 little dots, and it says show subtitles. And so you might want to turn that on, because one segment of the video, the recording was done outdoors, and so it is a little hard to hear. So yes, go ahead and do that, and we'll turn it over to our Advocacy in Action segment.
Hey, it's Keisha here with Defending the Early Years podcast. We'll be focused on amplifying the voices of early childhood educators, advocates, and all of those who love children.
Keisha Reed interviews Veronica McLaurin Brown and Peter Rocktwich about their advocacy efforts using a DEY mini grant in North Carolina.
Hello, Peter and Veronica. I'm so excited to have you here today at the Defending the Early Years Summer Institute. I am so excited to hear a little bit about your initiative that you have going. I know that you guys applied for and were awarded a Defending the Early Years mini grant. And if you could just share with us what this wonderful work you're doing and what came of that award.
Well, let's see, if you want to know the work we're doing, our work grew out of a concern that young children in the New Hanover County schools in New Hanover County, North Carolina, were receiving out-of-school suspensions for minor offenses, such as insubordination or inappropriate language or showing disrespect, the kind of childhood behavior you might expect from a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, or 7-year-old, and clearly a learning opportunity for all of those children. So the work we were doing primarily was to educate the public that what we found was, as we talked to community leaders, faith leaders, business leaders, and just other members of the community, no one was aware that 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds were being kicked out of school for minor offenses. And so I think our main emphasis was getting the word out. And we did that through many different ways. Initially, we sat down with each board member, the school board member, to talk to them, because the school board had the authority to change that policy. But we sat down, as I say, with individuals to have meetings. Veronica and I are both retired educators, so we had the flexibility to meet with lots of different people every week. But we also had printed material that we put out. We went to community events and had information tables. We had an opportunity to speak to different community groups. We were part of 2 public forums in our community where we spoke with other leaders in the community about this issue to educate the public. We also have on social media utilized Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course we spoke publicly once a month at the Board of Education meetings, and our speeches were recorded, and then we included that on our YouTube channel. So I'll let Veronica maybe add to that story, but educating the public was really mission number one.
Right, and I would like to add, when we started the advocacy in March, the board voted 7-0 to do nothing about suspensions. The group that was advocating for ending suspensions for elementary schools was actually the NAACP advocacy, parent advocacy group. Pete and I, after that vote, met and decided that we want to continue the advocacy. We made a pact with each other that we would work on this issue until we solved it and they changed the policy, or someone was throwing dirt on top of our bodies. And so he's given you a wonderful idea of all the things that we did. But I think one of the most important things that we did is that we listened to all the groups that we talked to and interacted with, and we continued to modify our messaging so that when we first started, we were speaking first about ending out-of-school suspensions. And someone said, well, you might be going down a rabbit hole with that. And we listened, and we started our advocacy with keeping students in school, keeping our young children in school. So I think that was one of the most important things that we did, is that we listened to everyone. We talked to everyone. We had a small core group of people, but we enjoyed each other. Every meeting was exhilarating. And he talked about us having a billboard and having posters and signs and shirts. And the exciting thing about that is that thanks to your $500, we were able to help with our expenses. And other than that, basically what happened was, whenever we had an idea, we were fortunate enough that someone in the group found the money to pay for it. We never had a discussion about it. We just talked about our planning. I like to say one of the most important things that we did is we worked every day on our advocacy. We talked about the grain. For me, it was like a grain of sand moment, filling the bucket. And so I can say every day except for Christmas and the day before Christmas, from March to March, I made sure that if I couldn't fill the bucket up with sand, I put a grain of sand in it, and our entire team had that same expectation of working on this project.
So what it sounds like is that you guys used lots of avenues, lots of ways to talk to the people. And the most important thing that you said, and that I hope that people take away, is the listening portion. You guys had a message and something to say, but listening to how people received it and altering it to make it heard, to me, is a gold mine. I'm gonna write a note here for myself, because that's a wonderful perspective that I hope everybody takes away with them. So how long were you working on this initiative before you started to see some change and some shift in the mindset of the people who you had been speaking and listening to?
Well, we started in, Veronica and I started working together in March of 2021. Veronica already mentioned that that's when the school board had its decisive vote to pretty much maintain the current, what was then the current out-of-school suspension policy. And I would say our campaign working went on for 13 months. That meant for 13 months, we were making phone calls, meeting with people, showing up monthly at the board meetings. And I would say that probably after the first 2 or 3 months, we started to gain some momentum, little at a time. As our numbers grew and more people showed up at the school board meetings wearing our Love Our Children shirts or speaking publicly, it was picked up by the local press, saying that there's a growing interest in this issue. And so we were able to be interviewed on the radio, articles were written about our efforts. And it just seemed that each month we were gaining momentum, having more people showing up. And it got to the point, probably after 10 months of our initiative, that the board president thought that there was too much of us at the board. They actually tried to change the policy as to who could speak to the board and for how long, and made false claims about how we were monopolizing the discussion. There were two sides of that coin. One was, after 8 months, 10 months, why hadn't the board done anything? The fact was they were just kicking the can down the road. They were ineffective, took no action on our request. And it got to the point where even a board member said, "Oh my God, they've even got a billboard up now." I mean, the board clearly noticed it was more than just our showing up, that we were doing community organizing as well. So it did grow gradually. And in terms of the timeline, it was about a year to the day that they took a new vote on the policy, and that vote went, 4 people wanted to keep the vote the same and 3 people were ready to change it, which meant we had flipped 3 votes, and we only needed 1 more vote to change the policy. And much to our delight, the following month, a 4th board member said, I want to vote on this again. Pretty much unheard of that the school board would vote on the same policy in 2 consecutive months. And I think what might have helped flip the vote was that we had current data about their suspension policy that showed that they had made some changes internally and were making progress. And when it was clear that we had our 4 votes at that meeting, which was 13 months after the initial vote, all of the board members voted unanimously to change it. So our storyline really is we flipped all 7 votes in 13 months. And the takeaway there was just our persistence, showing up month after month after month, never giving up, and always sitting in the front row, always with our shirts on, always signing up. They knew who we were when we came to the podium. They stopped, we stopped introducing ourselves, saying, "Hi, my name is," they just knew who we were and they knew why we were there.
And I'd like to add that one of the things that we did was we were non-political. We talked to everyone. A second thing that we did, we made sure that we were respectful. We focused on the facts. And every time we heard something that was inconsistent with the facts, what we did is spent most of our times doing the research and providing the facts, rather than just saying that that's not truthful. We said, here are the facts. So I think that strategy enabled us to maintain a respectful and relationship with the board members and other staff that was one of respect, and they understood that we were really just trying to help children. And I think the other thing that we did that was very effective is we selected one thing and we said we were going to work on that. We targeted, we were focused, everybody understood what it was. It was easy to explain. And I think that helped us. We didn't try, when we first started, we went to our first meeting, people were asking us so many questions, and one of our team members, Loretta Stackhouse, said, "We're just like an ant taking a bite out of an elephant." And once she said that, we start using that in our actions when we went into groups and they wanted to talk about all the huge and numerous problems of our school system. We were able to use our conversation, our meme, to help them understand that we were focusing on this single problem.
Mhm. And how did you guys decide the single problem that you would focus on? What drove you to this particular cause?
Well, that's probably my story, because before that March vote in 2021, I had started to attend some local NAACP meetings. There was a group within the NAACP called the Parents Council, and when I started attending their meetings, they were working on a project to end suspensions for pre-K through fifth grade. And they wanted to end all suspensions. That would have included in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions. So they had a much larger goal than we had. And so I had offered to help as part of their effort, and I ended up doing the research. So that's sort of where I started finding all the information, public information from the state education department and from the school district itself. And it turned out that when the vote, the initial vote went 7-0 to keep the suspension policy the same, the local NAACP kind of said, well, I guess, we're not going to be able to change this. We're going to have to do something else or work on something different. And Veronica and I were just getting fired up at that point. And so really that was a huge catalyst for Veronica and I to start working, saying, no, what the NAACP did was actually they missed a couple of steps. They never reached out to the community. And so we were determined to go out into the community and talk to people and educate them. As I said, what we found was people had never heard of this before, and they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that our early childhood students would be kicked out of school for things that actually were learning opportunities, teachable moments.
Yeah.
So it was very easy to find support because people were just in disbelief that our school district was suspending hundreds of students. In the 2018-2019 school year, there were over 800 elementary school suspensions. And the most disturbing part was the disparate application of the out-of-school suspension policy. 18% of those students were Black students, but they represented over 60% of all of the out-of-school suspensions. And that was just disgusting.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable.
And you might say that we just made the perfect pair, because Peter had come, he'd been here how many months? About 5 months, Peter?
At that point, it was probably about a half a year when we...
half a year. I had spent all of my career in Wilmington, except for 1 year in the educational system. And I happened on, because of the pandemic, the meeting when Peter was given all the data. And it was easy for me to connect because it was data that I had been fighting against for so many decades. I left the school system and I came back. I was just shocked that the disparity had almost doubled. It had increased so. And so I think that added to my outrage, and the pandemic added to an opportunity for me to become engaged and just commit to trying to bring about change for our students in our school system.
Well, congratulations, because you guys surely made change. You did not give up. What are your next steps? I think I read somewhere something about Veronica. What are your next steps, guys? What is the next bite going to be off that elephant?
Okay, I can tell you, for me, because I was working on the advocacy for Love Our Children team, and I was in the school board meetings for 13 consecutive months. I was at their interim meetings and I listened to all their committee meetings. You might say I had a Rosa Parks moment, or an epiphany moment, or even somebody touched me from above, but I decided to run for the school board, and Peter actually is my campaign chairperson. So we're still working
The
together.
dynamic duo,
The dynamic, and another young lady that was with Love Our Children, Loretta, also is my treasurer. So we're moving forward to not just try to do one policy, but to help me move and get a seat on the board and concentrate on more policies that help children. So that's my next step. And I'm going to let Peter talk about the vision for Love Our Children. And the other thing that we're doing deliberately is I'm stepping back from being the face of Love Our Children doing my campaign, because it's very important to us to know that when we talk about children and caring for children and education, it has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
So Love Our Children's work is not done with this issue. It might not come as a surprise that when the board voted in our favor, flipping all 7 votes, there was no celebration from the school district announcing, we were ending, suspensions of our youngest students. They kept quiet about that. I think one of our first jobs for the new school year will be to make sure that we educate the community again that the policy has changed, and then to be available as advocates for any families that believe that maybe their children were unjustly or unfairly suspended in the new school year, to advocate for them by asking that the new policy, in fact, be enforced. So I think that education process is, again, going to take a daily effort to do that. Again, reaching out to everyone and just using our resources and our connections to help families that may feel that their child has been singled out for an inappropriate reason and possibly kicked out of school. In addition to that, I think it's important to note that 11 states and the District of Columbia already have statutes that outlaw out-of-school suspensions for their youngest learners. However, in North Carolina, we're the first of 100 counties that have changed that policy. And so I would love our group to try to identify at least one more county that we could work with and help share our resources and our information, in hopes that maybe one county at a time we can begin to see this policy flipped, and then eventually work up to our General Assembly at the Capitol to actually change it at the state level as well.
It sounds like you guys have a wonderful blueprint, and I thank you so much for your time and for telling us about this wonderful, wonderful advocacy work you're doing. I look forward to continue watching you guys and to seeing you make a wave of change. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We continue to be inspired by the advocacy work on behalf of young children in Illinois. Last year, Cassie Creswell from the Illinois Families for Public Education joined the Institute to discuss their efforts to get a right to play bill passed. Well, this year, they continued their amazing advocacy efforts to prohibit the Illinois State Board of Education from requiring students in kindergarten through 2nd grade from taking standardized tests. After the State Board of Education began considering tests for young students, Cassie and other advocates got to work. The Too Young to Test Act was signed into law in May of this year and took place immediately. Thank you to everyone in Illinois who continues to advocate for the childhood all children deserve. One way DEY supports advocacy is to offer mini grants to help foster your good work in your community as related to DEY's 3 principal goals. First, to advocate at the grassroots, local, state, regional, and federal levels for education policies based on child development theory and research. Second, to mobilize the early childhood community to speak up for age-appropriate standards, assessments, and classroom practices that are based on the research. And third, to promote appropriate practices in early childhood classrooms and to support educators in counteracting policies and practices that undermine whole child health and optimal learning. In 2021, we awarded Austin Peay State University Little Gov's Child Learning Center a grant to hold a family play day from Amazon to Amazing on September 25th, 2021. Funds from the DEY mini grant were used to purchase materials for the play day, including cardboard boxes, paints, brushes, tape, and markers. You can see more photos from their amazing play day on our website. The DEY podcast with Keisha Reed features educators, advocates, and other change makers about their grassroots projects, innovations in education, and reimagining early childhood environments. Early in this year, Keisha invited Atia Wells, founder and executive director of Backyard Base Camp in Baltimore, Maryland. Atia is a pediatric nurse with a passion to introduce, educate, and connect families in Baltimore, especially those of color, to local outdoor spaces. You can learn more about the 10-acre Bliss Meadow land reclamation project on our Advocacy Map and by listening to the podcast. A DEY mini grant is not limited to the United States. In April of this year, we were able to give a grant to Mercy Youth Initiative in Kenya. Mercy Youth Initiative is a community-based oriented organization implementing high-quality early childhood and youth enrichment, education, and training programs. With their DEY mini grant, they hosted a community-wide event that brought together a total of 20 early childhood education teachers from 20 schools. You can read more about their workshop on our mini grant page on our website. We love hearing about legislative advocacy efforts. Listen to New Hampshire State Representative Victoria Sullivan speak about her efforts to get a play-based kindergarten bill passed in 2018.
So when we had the Common Core standards come in, we started hearing about these rigors for kindergarten, which was concerning to me as a parent. But my children are almost 2 years apart, and I saw the difference in kindergarten between my oldest son and my younger son. And they had half-day kindergarten, and they had a wonderful teacher, and she actually helped me with this bill because she started to see how the curriculum had changed and how much stress was being placed on these children. They didn't have time. When Buddy was in kindergarten, they did a play called, the Nutcracker play at Christmas time, and they did a wonderful job. They had time to play outside. They had more creativity. When Seamus came up, it was really all about math and reading and making sure that they ticked off these boxes, and they really lost the socialization of class. And I think because we've lost some components of creativity and socialization, we're starting to see more problems with bullying and things on the playground. And so when the governor had the push for all-day kindergarten, I became more concerned about the stresses and the rigors on these kids for a full day. And when that legislation originally went through, I tried to amend it to say that there would be an option for parents who needed half day for their kids because not everyone's ready for it. Some kids are still technically four when they enter, kindergarten, turning 5 during September. Other kids are almost 6. So there's a big swing there. I also tried to get play-based in at that time. And I got half of it. I got a component that says if parents go to the principal, they can't have the half-day kindergarten. I don't know if all parents are aware of that when they're starting their children, but that is the law. That is up to them. If they want to have the half-day within if your school offers full day, you can still say, I'd like to have my child in only half of a day. The play-based was killed, though. I was actually pretty beat up for wanting to have play-based kindergarten in there. I did a thing on Close-Up, and Adam Sexton really started the ball rolling with the conversation, because when I first introduced it, and there were little bits and pieces in the paper, people started emailing me saying I didn't know what I was talking about. Kindergarten's always been play-based, because they thought that it was what it still was. And so the conversation started happening, and then I started talking to colleagues that were involved in education, and Mary Guile was a big advocate for play-based, and we worked together. It was a bipartisan bill that we put in, and this year it got so much support because I think people were really starting to talk about it and realize the changes that had happened. So it passed the House on a vote of, it passed my committee unanimously and passed the House on a vote of 328 to 8. So I think people were really ready for it this year, and they really understood what had happened and why we need to pull it back. I think the biggest component is going to be the movement in the classroom. And this is why we're doing the training. The DOE is doing the training. We really need administrators to understand, because teachers are all on board. I've gotten so much positive feedback really from across the country about this program. People are watching it nationally. So there are videos that have been released from the New Hampshire Department of Education to help teachers and administrators. But there's also things out there from Dr. Wisniewski, who's one of the premier people in play-based education in the country that I've had conversations with. She actually helped us with a conference call to get these things sorted out, so we did it the right way. And right now kids are sitting in a classroom at centers and they work at a center and then they kind of shift and it's quiet and this isn't going to be as quiet. These kids aren't going to be sitting all day. They're going to be engaging each other. They're going to be building. They're going to be using their hands. They're going to be experimenting. They're going to be outdoors more. And it's really the way that kindergarten was intended to be. Kindergarten means a child's garden, and it was intended to be movement and outdoors and just let them be creative and let the teachers see who they are and where their strengths are. At the same time, recognize where their weaknesses are so they can give them, some guidance in that direction. So I think that's going to be, the biggest thing the biggest adjustment, I think, for the schools, for teachers to understand kids out of the chair is okay, and for the administrators to understand kids out of the chair is okay.
Keisha Reed interviewed Becky Gamache about advocating for equitable access to nature and play.
Hello, Becky Gamache. I'm so excited to be speaking with you again and get a little update on the amazing work that you're doing over there in Minnesota. Can you give us a refresher, like what's going on over there and what are some updates? Because I know you've been busy.
Hi, Keisha. I'm super happy to be talking about this. We are doing some great things in Duluth. Kind of some updates. This school year, we opened up in the fall, we opened up 3 playscapes at our most urban elementary schools. Our director, Sherry Williams, had written into our grant to build playscapes. If you've ever built one, sometimes they can be quite a expensive undertaking. So it was great to get that written into our Head Start grant. And so we built them at 3 of our elementary schools that just had regular elementary school playgrounds, and they don't have much green space. So now they're for infants to 5-year-olds, and they're full of natural elements, and they're all a little bit different, taking into account the kind of lay of the land of the school and the space that they were able to use. And we're seeing lots of neighborhood kids using the playscapes now that our weather has gotten nicer. When we opened them, it was November, so for us that's starting to get cold and icy. So we had a few visitors, but now in the spring there were lots of visitors, and I imagine all summer long they'll be quite loved by the neighborhood and the families that were in our program too.
Mm-hmm. So did you guys take out playground equipment and replace it with more nature-based equipment, or was it a blank slate before you started?
They were blank slates. We, of course, we're in elementary school, so we have to share the playground with all the elementary grades, and sometimes that gets a little tricky, especially with COVID. It was really tricky because groups couldn't go out together. So working with the principals of each school, our director found spots in each of the school area. One of them is like in this little kind of, I would call it an alcove, that you would never even expect to put a playscape, but it had some great features open up there, like a climbing wall, because it was a cement retaining wall, and some other spaces in there that they could use to make like a fort area and things like that. And another one is kind of off to the side of the school in this scrub brushy area, and we had 3 owls design it, and they designed all our playscapes, and they left a lot of that brush, so it's kind of this little hidey spot for kids. And there's spots they kind of, it's hard for me to get in there, so I don't usually use that entrance, but they love to crawl in there, and built on a hill. And it was funny because they didn't think the kids would use the hill. And as soon as I saw it, I thought that's going to be the thing. And it turned into a mudslide hill, and then a snow slide hill. And it's so steep, the kids have to like cling to the fence to climb along. So it's really enticing to be able to go there.
So you use space that was unused before and really enhance the environment. That is amazing. So what has been the response? I heard you say that the community is starting to use this space. what has been the response as far as the school as a whole? Because this was built for the preschool age children, but everyone gets to benefit from it. So are the teachers noticing any changes in the children?
Yes, they, well, like I did a survey. So that's one of the things that I do in my position is to, just find out things. And so finding out, our teachers going outside more than they used to now that we have the playscape, and also this kind of green light to be like, yeah, you can move your day outside if you want. And they all, I wish I had the statistic in front of me, but they're all going outside more and then more and more. And we were lucky this spring to get some extra funds too. And so many of the teachers ordered more outdoor gear. So they're saying, yep, we love the outdoor gear that we got with our grant, like the rain suits and things like that, but we want more because we want to go outside in all kinds of weather. And, Minnesota gets quite cold, so snowsuits and really good mittens and good boots. So they'll have some of them will have classroom sets of those.
That's wonderful. Is this something that you see spreading, just continuing to go from school to school? Do you think it's contagious?
I think it is. I just am in my own little pocket and world sometimes, but just doing some other trainings and things with other people throughout the state. Minnesota right now is exploding, and we have, I think we're like third highest in the nation for outdoor preschool programs. And we did a spring conference, and we had some breakout sessions, and people working with public school programs was one of them. And sometimes I always think these conferences draw more people already doing the work, or they're going to have a private program, but it was one of the biggest breakout groups. So we had lots of public school people wondering about how to do it or giving advice because they were already doing it. So yeah, it's definitely spreading. And I feel like if it can spread in a place like Minnesota with such extremes, it can spread everywhere.
Yes, it could be a wonderful model for places like Maryland or anywhere really, anywhere in the US and anywhere in the world really. So wow, wonderful work. So all right, what is your, you've done, you guys have worked as a team and got this big goal going. Where do you see this going? How do you see it growing? How do you what's your next move?
Well, I think more for our program, more training for teachers. They always are looking for more things to do, how to do things better outside, not only outside, but how to incorporate play more. Sometimes in the public school, we operate under this umbrella of, we have to meet all of these different outcomes, and we do. And I think now our teachers are seeing that they can meet those outcomes through play, also through being outside, bringing nature into the classroom. So I really think just more support in that area. That's what my role is with our district. So more professional development, more coaching. I do some coaching with teachers too, just to support the work that they're doing and to be that encouragement, say, yeah, what you're doing is important and it matters, and look at the results. Like our assessment results I think they're amazing, and they're amazing for all kids from our, we have 3 different funding streams. We have Head Start, and then we have 2 different state funding streams. And within one of those state funding streams, it's parents on a sliding fee. So we have all economic backgrounds, and all of our kids are having great outcomes, and they're growing.
Wonderful. And what do you think the role of research has in this project, or anything that you guys are doing moving forward, or even in the seriousness that people took to this project? Like, how do you think research has affected that?
Well, I think, we're always hearing everything has to be research based, and So we've done some partnership with our local university and with David Sobel and Antioch University to do some different kinds of research. And, we're seeing similar or better outcomes, versus traditional. I always laugh at traditional preschool programs because I always say traditional, what were play-based, but now traditional means academic-based. Academic-based versus play-based. So I think that research piece is really important because if we have to, I don't like to say like we have to prove what we're doing is right and the best thing for kids, but we do because we have people who aren't in this field and who, hold on to the funding streams, and so they need to see that play is important and play is how children grow.
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming back and updating us. And I can't wait to hear more and continue to follow this journey and to watch this spread and spread and spread. Thank you so much, Becky, for all your work and your passion.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed learning about the amazing work of our advocacy partners. Do you have an advocacy idea related to our mission that you need support with? Apply for a DEY mini grant. Are you doing advocacy work or know of early childhood advocacy work in your community? Add the organization or the legislation to our advocacy map. Do you want to learn more about advocacy and the work of early childhood advocates across the country? Then make sure you listen to the DEY podcast. More information can be found on our website at www.dey.org. Thank you. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be joined by Nancy and Keisha now so we can talk a little bit about this video. Thank you, Keisha, because I'm pretty sure this was your idea. We were like, what are we going to do for the second hour? And I think you coined it, advocacy in action. So thanks for the great idea and for doing those interviews and for doing like a visual podcast special for us. It was great.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed talking to both Peter and Veronica and also Becky. And just, I felt so enthusiastic when I was done. I was like, okay, I need to have, I took points from everybody. I need to have one distinct mission. What is my mission? And then I need to go to the community and listen to what their needs are and what they understand about that mission. And then get research and then educate. But it was just so wonderful to see that we can make change, and it doesn't take, we could take a bite off the elephant, that just really stuck with me.
Yeah. And I know people are saying, well, they're retired. That's the point. We have retired teachers all over our community. Mm-hmm. And once they give us all their stuff, how about we work with them? Right? There's tons of retired educators who would love to do this kind of work and partner and support, and so, yeah, it's very contagious. And I love just the way they were so committed and the pushback, they got it, trying to limit their time on the mic and all sorts of things and not being deterred and I call it public shaming, but putting it in the paper. Once they started getting in the press that there was this suspension issue that they weren't addressing, all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're going to vote on this, right? Nobody likes to look bad, right? Like if you're ever experiencing bad treatment by a major corporation, tweet them. You will have a response in 30 seconds because they have paid people to watch what's being said about them on Twitter, right? And it's the same thing with our elected officials. If we publicly share what they are not doing and what they are doing, they're more likely to get involved. So that was great. And thank you for bringing Becky back. Becky was on the podcast. She hasn't gotten a grant from us. We would be happy to fund the work that she's doing, but or to help with it. But she's been on the podcast before, and I know, and I've met her when I was in Duluth, Minnesota, observing some play out there. And it's just amazing to think that, you just find someone committed to supporting you. And now they have playscapes. They have beautiful playscapes in urban schools that are being used more and more.
It's so inspiring to me to think about how people bring about change. And I don't know, we're at a time in society when there's an enormous amount of top-down change and people often feel disempowered. And it's really, really inspiring to see every one of these local actions, and also to remember that we all can do this. And that actually, when you look at history, all of the the social change that has taken place over time came out of, grassroots movements. And these are small grassroots movements where, people are trying to work in the local community, work with teachers, with kids, and make positive change. And you can't predict, where it's going to go, who else is going to catch on, and what other community is going to participate. And, it's inspiring, because that's all that we can really do. I mean, on the large scale, there's not a lot we can do. We can vote, but this is exciting because it's so hands-on and present, and people see the results of their actions.
Yeah, and it's grassroots, and that's what's really always saved us. It's the grassroots, the mutual aid, the communities coming together and supporting each other. We need more of that, and I think these were all examples of that. And if you change one mind or two minds, you're making a difference, right? You're having that ripple effect, and that's so important.
Yeah.
And what I noticed about both was the connection to research, the partnership with someone who is able to collect the facts. So that immediately got me thinking, okay, who do I know that's like a research person, Denisha, who can help connect the facts? Just knowing, for me, looking at these other advocates, it's like a blueprint to see, okay, this has worked. How can I put this into my own context? And that was one of the things, partnership with someone who either has done or is in a position to do the research or collect the data that's already there, that can partner with you if you're the hands-on person who's, got the school or is passionate about the initiative. The other thing that stuck out to me is the community aspect of it, like the real outreach that you have to do to just inform. They talked about billboards and stickers and shirts and all of these grassroots visuals that really make the difference, to pull a community together.
Yeah, and the name, right? Love our children. Like, who's gonna? No, we don't love our. No one's gonna say that, right? So it helps. It definitely helps. So thank you so much for that. And so yeah, we hope. Thank you, Jerry Lynn, for putting in the chat some of the link to the podcast and to the DEY mini grants, where you can see the reports from the folks in Kenya and Tennessee and North Carolina and all over the country. And please, the Advocacy Map, and just want to give a shout out to my co-director, Blakely Bundy, who updates that map relentlessly. We got it started. We actually worked with some students from a class, Emily Gassoy students in Georgetown needed an advocacy project, and so they helped. But Blakely's been a one-woman leader on keeping that map going. So we help. We thank her for all of that work. And if you have any, you can go right on and submit something, and we'll get it up there, and so that we can continue to build and let people know what's happening in your community. Now, okay. I think it's time for a special announcement.
I have an announcement, and I have just enough time to make it, I think. Thank you for the floor. So, friends, we started Defending the Early Years about 10 years ago. We have grown in a steady, slow and steady way that I think is a healthy way to grow. And we've operated with a lot of volunteers, and very gradually we've increased our visibility and the range of issues that we're working on and the activities that we do. So we're at a point in our development. It's a pretty wonderful point where we're able now to have a full-time executive director. Up until now, we've had co-directors, Denisha and Blakely, and we're ready now to really join the ranks of fully engaged, full-blown nonprofit with a full-time executive director. And we had to really search to find the right person because it takes an incredible skill set to do this job. Someone has to have a lot of flexibility, a lot of awareness, a lot of ability to deal with diverse people, to communicate, to solve problems, to spearhead projects. And we looked very hard to find the person with the skill set for this job. And guess where we found her? Right in our front yard. our executive director, I'm really happy to tell you, is Denisha Jones. And
Thank you. Super excited.
we are thrilled about that. I don't know if you folks know, but she's been the head of teacher education, the Art of Teaching graduate teacher education program at Sarah Lawrence College. She has a long bio. You can read it on the website. She's been a leader in the Black Lives Matter in School movement. And that's important to us very much. She co-authored with Jesse Hagopian the Black Lives Matter in School book. And she's involved. She's got her fingers in a lot of pots that I can't all list, but those are two of her outstanding achievements. But she's going to be with us full time now, and we're thrilled about it. And we also have another role that we developed, another position in defending the early years. So we've got two new positions. The other position is Director of Communications. It's somebody who's able to handle all of our, our newsletter and our social media and all of the ways that we interact with the outside world. That's also a really, really big job. And we looked, again, very hard to find the person with the skills to carry that out. And once again, amazingly, we found her. And she's right here in our yard, and it's Keisha Reed. We have so many, we're so excited about it. And I'm sure a lot of you know her from the podcasts. I hope that you'll watch them, listen to them if you haven't. They're so enlightening and wonderful. She's the brains behind it. She's the host of it, and they're really enlightening and wonderful. And we're Keisha has been, is the founder and director of the Discovery Early Learning Center in Maryland, and she is a committed play advocate. She is, I do not back down play advocate. And just try to argue with her about play if you question me on this. She understands children, and she will stand up for who they are, how they learn, what they need. And we're so proud to have you with us, Keisha.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I am so proud to be a part of this work that DEY is doing, and just honored and can't wait to continue work.
Yeah, me too. And I was like, Keisha, so if I'm going to do this, I'm going to need you to do it. And she said yes. So we still have a great team, right? We still have what we call our leadership team, which will remain Nancy as our founder and president, right? Yeah. Yep. And we have Blakely Bundy, who kind of, she did an amazing job as co-director of DEY for, I don't even know how many years. We have to find that out.
Probably 5 or 6.
5 or 6 years, but it's going to just transition to our leadership team. So it's sort of a post-second retirement, but not too far away, because we love working with Blakely. And Jerry Lynn remains on our leadership group as well, as our treasurer. So we're just really excited to keep it going. We have a wonderful advisory board, which we will be looking to get more involved and even expand. And just gives us a really good opportunity to do more. This work is amazing, but it requires full-time. It requires a full-time commitment to really lead these campaigns, lead these work, do the research, do the things like Linda suggested. Like, let's make these one-pager research statements that show, this is the research, this is how you do it. Let's help people craft, right, their advocacy work, and let's help people on the ground, whether it's local, state, or federal, like really bring about change. And so I'm excited to do that. I'm excited to do it with Keisha and to continue working with Nancy and Jerry Lynn and Blakely and Diane. Diane, who brings us, always reminds us that there's so much work already out there and that we need to go back to it, right? She's always like, yes, either she wrote it or she's read it and it's out there. So that's important, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can go back to the work, and Diane's work it doesn't change. If we're still out here citing Piaget, right, and Vygotsky, we can still be talking about the work that Diane Levin and others did around peace education, around helping children deal with war and conflict, and all of those things. So we're going to continue to build on her knowledge and Nancy's and everyone else's, and just take DEY to the next level, because we're
at a new level, and we carry on with the stability of our National Advisory Board and our leadership team. So we've got the sort of solid support system behind the two of you.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll be there for you whenever you, well, as we continue doing this work together.
No doubt.
So,
All right. Well, thank you all for staying on for that little late announcement. It's official now, and we look forward. So please, we hope you will come back tomorrow to day 3. It's our final day. So the theme for day 3 is aligning research and practice in early childhood education. And so we've got Dale Farron. If you're not familiar, Dale was a researcher at Peabody who recently looked at academic effects of state-funded pre-K in Tennessee. And let me tell you, that is current research that is telling us, all of us play warriors, we were right. So Dale's going to talk about that. We have the amazing Carol Murray and her amazing work on pedagogy of care and practices. If you have not read her book, Illuminating Care, I haven't finished it, Carol, but I am reading it because it's amazing. So she's going to talk, and we're bringing Keisha back because Keisha reads so much research and theory in early childhood, and then she takes it all in her practice. I wish I could get her to just teach teachers full time, but she is needed in the program with the children. But I wanted to talk about that because I rarely see teachers who are able to consume so much information and just make it what they do and really let it guide that. So we're all going to talk about that tomorrow. I'll be moderating. Here's the link in the chat for the notes. Like we have resources from day 1, from day 2. There's also a link if you want a certificate. There's a Google form for you to fill out. All of the links and stuff that we've been sharing, and we'll add to it for day 3. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.